Tidjane Thiam follows his employee, and what he discovers breaks his heart. The morning sun blazed over Abidjan's business district as Tidjane Thiam gazed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office. The city sprawled below, a testament to Ivory Coast's economic revival. 3 years had passed since he'd returned to his homeland after his tenure at Credit Suisse, determined to contribute to Africa's development through his new investment firm. "Monsieur Thiam, your 9 o'clock is here," his assistant announced, interrupting his thoughts. "Thank you, Mariam. And what about Conan? Has he arrived yet?" Tidjane asked, checking his watch with growing concern. "No, sir. Still no word from him. It's the 3rd day now." Tidjane frowned. Conan Kouassi was his most promising analyst, a brilliant young man from a humble background in Bouaké. Tidjane had personally recruited him from the National University, impressed by his keen intellect and work ethic. For him to miss work without notice was completely out of character. "Call his emergency contact again," Tidjane instructed before turning to welcome his visitor. The day proceeded with meetings and calls, but Tidjane couldn't shake his concern about Conan. By late afternoon, when there was still no word, he made a decision that surprised even himself. He would drive to Conan's address in Abobo, one of Abidjan's working-class neighborhoods. "Monsieur, let me send a driver," Mariam suggested, alarmed. "No," Tidjane replied firmly. "I'll go myself." The contrast was stark as Tidjane's Mercedes navigated from the sleek highways of Plateau into the narrow, bustling streets of Abobo. Children played between market stalls while motorcycle taxis weaved through traffic. Tidjane felt the eyes of residents follow his luxury vehicle with curiosity. Following the GPS, he eventually parked outside a modest apartment building. The security guard stared in disbelief as the well-known businessman stepped out, dressed in an impeccable suit despite the afternoon heat. "I'm looking for Conan Kouassi," Tidjane explained in Dioula, instantly earning the guard's respect by speaking the local language. "Apartment 304, sir, but he hasn't been here for days." Tidjane knocked at the apartment door anyway. No answer. As he turned to leave, a young woman emerged from the adjacent apartment. "Are you looking for Conan?" she asked cautiously. "Yes, I'm his employer, Tidjane Thiam. He hasn't come to work and we're concerned." The woman's expression shifted. "I'm Aya, his neighbor. He left 3 days ago in a hurry. He said something about his family in Bouaké." She hesitated. He seemed troubled. Tidjane handed her his business card. "If he returns or contacts you, please let me know." Driving back toward Plateau, Tidjane made a sudden decision. Instead of turning toward his luxurious residence in Cocody, he instructed his GPS to plot a route to Bouaké, nearly 350 kilometers north. Something told him Conan was in trouble and he couldn't ignore it. As the city gave way to the lush countryside, Tidjane called Mariam to clear his schedule for the next day. "I need to find out what's happening with Conan," he explained. "Something doesn't feel right." What Tidjane didn't know as he drove north through the gathering dusk was that this impulsive journey would reveal circumstances that would profoundly challenge his understanding of the country he had returned to serve. The journey north revealed an Ivory Coast that executives rarely encountered. As dawn broke, Tidjane passed through villages where women balanced baskets of cassava on their heads and farmers led cattle to pasture. Each scene reminded him of his childhood before Switzerland, banking, and boardrooms had defined his life. Tidjane had left Mariam with instructions to gather everything they knew about Conan's family. The information came through as he stopped for fuel near Yamoussoukro. Conan's father had died during the civil conflict years ago. His mother and 2 younger siblings lived in a small home on the outskirts of Bouaké. Conan had been sending them a significant portion of his salary each month. What troubled Tidjane was the timing. Why would Conan rush home without notice just days after their investment firm had secured a major contract to develop infrastructure projects? Conan had led much of the financial modeling. His sudden disappearance made little sense. By mid-morning, Tidjane reached Bouaké, the country's second-largest city. Though it had recovered from the civil war, Evidence of past conflicts remained in bullet-scarred buildings and unfinished reconstruction projects. Following the address from Conan's employee records, Tidjane navigated to a modest neighborhood where unpaved roads turned dusty in the dry season. He found the house, a simple concrete structure with a corrugated metal roof. Children played in the yard, stopping to stare as the luxury car approached. An elderly woman stepped out, wiping her hands on her colorful panier. "Madame Kouassi?" Tidjane asked gently. "Yes?" She regarded him with confusion. "I'm Tidjane Thiam, Conan's employer. Is he here?" Her face registered shock. "Conan? No, he is in Abidjan, working at your company." A cold sensation settled in Tidjane's stomach. "He hasn't been home recently?" "No." Worry creased her brow. "Is something wrong? Has something happened to my son?" Tidjane quickly reassured her. "I'm sure everything is fine. There's just been a misunderstanding at the office." He couldn't bring himself to alarm her further. A teenage girl emerged from the house. Conan's sister, Tidjane guessed. She studied him intently before speaking. "The last time we spoke to Conan was 4 days ago. He called to say extra money was coming for Mother's medicine." She hesitated. He sounded strange. Worried. "Medicine?" Tidjane inquired. The mother sighed. "For my diabetes. The treatments are expensive." Tidjane's mind raced. Something wasn't adding up. "May I see Conan's room? Perhaps there's a clue to where he might be." They led him to a small, neat room that clearly hadn't been used recently. As Tidjane scanned the sparse belongings, his eyes caught a stack of papers beneath the bed. With permission, he retrieved them. Medical bills, far exceeding what even Conan's generous salary could cover, along with loan documents from a company Tidjane didn't recognize. Crédit Rapide. "These interest rates are predatory," he murmured, examining the terms. Conan said not to worry, that he found a way to handle everything, the sister explained. "He's always taken care of us since father died." As Tidjane prepared to leave, he assured the family he would find Conan. He left his contact information and enough cash to cover several months of medical expenses, waving away their protests. Back in his car, Tidjane called his head of security. "I need everything you can find on a company called Crédit Rapide," he instructed. "And check if Conan has used his bank cards or phone in the last 3 days." As he drove south toward Abidjan, a theory began to form, one that filled him with dread. The infrastructure project they'd just secured involved hundreds of millions of dollars. Conan had access to sensitive financial information, a young man desperate for money to save his mother, approached by the right people at the right time. "Please don't let it be that," Tidjane whispered to himself as the countryside rushed past. But deep down, he feared he was driving toward a truth that would break his heart. The sun was setting when Tidjane returned to Abidjan, the coastal city's skyline glowing against the darkening sky. Rather than heading home, he drove directly to his company's headquarters, where his head of security, Francois, awaited him. "What did you find?" Tidjane asked, loosening his tie as they entered his office. Francois placed a file on the desk. "Crédit Rapide operates in the gray areas of our financial system. They target vulnerable people with emergency loans at interest rates often exceeding 200% annually. They're not technically illegal, but..." He shrugged, the gesture conveying more than words. "And Conan's accounts?" "His last withdrawal was substantial, nearly his entire savings, 3 days ago from an ATM in Treichville." Francois hesitated. "There's more. His phone was last active near the port of Abidjan, then nothing. Complete silence." Tidjane stared at the map Francois had marked. The port area, especially at night, could be dangerous. It was also the perfect place for clandestine meetings. "The timing concerns me," Francois continued. 2 days before Conan disappeared, someone attempted to access our servers. Our cybersecurity team blocked it, but it was sophisticated. They were targeting files related to the infrastructure project. Tidjane's fears were materializing. Could Conan have been approached to provide inside information? Possibly. Or... Francois didn't finish the sentence. Or coerced. Tidjane completed the thought. If he was desperate enough to take loans from predators, he would be vulnerable to pressure. As darkness settled over the city, Tidjane made another unusual decision. With Francois reluctantly accompanying him, he drove to Treichville, parking near the last location where Conan's phone had been active. The nighttime port district pulsed with a different energy than Tidjane's usual haunts. Music spilled from small bars. Workers from the docks enjoyed evening meals at roadside stalls, and dealmakers of various sorts conducted business in shadowy corners. Francois looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Monsieur Thiam, this isn't safe for someone of your prominence." Tidjane ignored the warning, approaching a group of dock workers sharing drinks outside a small cafe. Conversations halted as they recognized him. Even in this neighborhood, the famous returning son of Ivory Coast was easily identifiable. "I'm looking for information about a young man who may have been here 3 days ago," Tidjane explained, showing Conan's photo on his phone. "He's not in trouble. I'm concerned for his safety." The men exchanged glances before one spoke up. "Why would someone like you be looking for someone here?" "He's my employee. More importantly, he's like a son to me." The emotion in Tidjane's voice was genuine. After a moment of evaluation, an older worker nodded toward a warehouse across the street. 3 nights ago, there was some activity there. Not normal business. A few cars, men in suits. He shrugged. "We mind our business, but it seemed unusual." Another added, "I saw a young man who could be him. He didn't look happy to be there." Thanking them, Tidjane withdrew to his car, where he and Francois observed the warehouse. It appeared abandoned now. "We should involve the police," Francois suggested. Tidjane shook his head. "Not yet. We don't know who's involved. If Conan is being pressured or threatened, official involvement might escalate the danger." As they prepared to leave, Tidjane's phone rang. An unknown number. "Monsieur Thiam." The voice was Conan's, but strained. "Please stop looking for me. I'm handling a personal matter. I'll return to work soon." "Conan, where are you? Are you safe? Your family is worried. Leave my family out of this." The uncharacteristic outburst shocked Tidjane. "Just, please. I need to handle this myself. Whatever trouble you're in, I can help." "No one can help." The call ended abruptly. Tidjane stared at the phone, heart pounding. He's being watched, or monitored. That wasn't a voluntary call. Francois nodded grimly. The question is by whom, and what exactly do they want from him? As they drove back toward the safety of Plateau, Tidjane's mind raced. Conan was alive but clearly in danger. The infrastructure project involved government contracts, foreign investors, and significant funds. The potential for corruption was ever-present. Had someone identified Conan as a weak link they could exploit for inside information? Or was this something even more sinister? Whatever the truth, Tidjane was now certain of one thing. Finding Conan meant confronting powerful forces that operated in the shadows of Ivory Coast's economic renaissance. Shadows Tidjane had perhaps been too willing to ignore since his return home. Morning sunlight streamed through the blinds as Tidjane reviewed the dossier his team had compiled overnight. Sleep had eluded him as he'd pondered Conan's predicament. The young analyst's forced phone call had only deepened his resolve to find him. The infrastructure project has several interesting stakeholders, Miriam noted, pointing to a complex organizational chart, including a holding company registered in Mauritius that traces back to Jean-Baptiste Coffey. Tidjane's expression darkened. Coffey was a notorious businessman with political connections who had somehow emerged unscathed from every corruption investigation. They had competed for the infrastructure contract, and Tidjane's firm had won largely due to Conan's brilliant financial modeling that showed how the project could be completed more efficiently. Coffey owned several businesses, Miriam continued, including a financial services company that acquired Credit Rapide 6 months ago. The connection crystallized. So Coffey's company gave predatory loans to Conan, putting him in an impossible financial situation then likely approached him for information about our bid. Francois entered with more troubling news. We found unusual transfers from one of our project accounts, small enough to stay under the reporting threshold, but totaling nearly 50 million CFA francs. That's impossible, Tidjane protested. Those accounts require dual authorization. The second authorization came from your credentials, sir, Francois said quietly. That's absurd, I never… Tidjane stopped short, remembering. Last week his computer had been updated by IT after supposed security concerns. They must have compromised my access during that maintenance. The pieces were falling into place. Conan, desperate to pay for his mother's treatments, took loans he couldn't repay. Coffee's people identified him as both vulnerable and valuable, then pressured him to provide access to Tidjane's systems. The money trail would implicate both Conan and Tidjane himself, discrediting them and potentially giving Coffee leverage to take over the project. Conan's not a criminal, Tidjane said firmly. He's a victim being forced to commit crimes, and they're setting him up to take the fall. Making a decision, Tidjane called a number he rarely used, his old schoolmate who now served as commissioner of financial crimes. Philippe, I need your help, but this must remain confidential. Tidjane explained the situation. I believe Conan is being held somewhere, forced to assist in this fraud. If we move officially, they might harm him or destroy evidence. This is serious, Tidjane. Coffee has powerful protectors, Philippe warned. But I can give you unofficial support. We've been building a case against him for years. By midday, they had a lead. One of Coffee's companies maintained a compound in Grand Bassam, the historic coastal town east of Abidjan. Surveillance photos showed increased activity there over the past 3 days. Tidjane insisted on accompanying. The small team of trusted officers Philippe assembled. They would conduct an unofficial inspection of the property, claiming to be following up on building code violations, a common pretext that rarely raised suspicions. As they approached the walled compound near the beach, Tidjane felt his heart racing. The peaceful colonial architecture of Grand Bassam belied the tension of their mission. If they were wrong, or if Coffee's people were tipped off, the consequences could be disastrous. The property manager appeared annoyed but not alarmed by their arrival. As the officers conducted their inspection, Tidjane noticed a separate guest house toward the back of the property. While the officers distracted the manager, he made his way toward it. Through a window, Tidjane saw what he'd been searching for. Conan, unharmed but exhausted, working at a laptop under the watchful eye of a guard. The relief Tidjane felt was quickly replaced by determination. Now they needed to get him out safely. Philippe's team discovered irregularities requiring the entire property to be temporarily evacuated for safety inspections. In the ensuing confusion, they managed to separate Conan from his watchers and whisk him into a waiting vehicle. The young man's face registered shock at seeing his CEO in person. Monsieur Thiam, why are you here? To bring you home, Conan, Tidjane said simply. Your mother needs you. At the mention of his mother, Conan's composure crumbled. They said they would hurt my family if I didn't help them. They knew everything about my mother's condition, my loans. I didn't know what else to do. I understand, Tidjane assured him as they drove away from Grand Bassam. Now we need to make this right. But as Philippe reminded them soberly, Coffee won't take this lightly, and he'll have evidence implicating both of you in financial crimes. This isn't over. Tidjane nodded grimly. The rescue was only the beginning. The harder part would be proving their innocence against a powerful enemy who had been planning this trap for months. And they had very little time before Coffee realized his leverage was gone. The headquarters of Tidjane's investment firm buzzed with tense energy as lawyers, cybersecurity experts, and financial investigators worked through the night. In a conference room overlooking Abidjan's glittering lagoon, Conan provided a complete account of his ordeal. They approached me after I visited the hospital for my mother's treatment, he explained, voice hollow with exhaustion. They knew exactly how much the treatments cost, offered a solution that seemed too good to be true. By the time I realized it was a trap, the debt had multiplied. Tidjane listened intently as Conan detailed how Kofi's operatives had escalated from financial pressure to outright threats, forcing him to provide access to company systems and manipulate financial transactions to create a trail of apparent corruption. They were meticulous, Philippe observed, creating evidence that would implicate both of you while keeping Kofi's involvement hidden behind layers of shell companies. Commissioner Philippe's unofficial task force had spent hours documenting the scheme. The fraudulent transfers, only discovered because Tidjane had personally gone looking for Conan, would have continued until millions were diverted. Once discovered, the carefully planted evidence would have suggested collusion between Tidjane and Conan to embezzle funds. The objective wasn't just money, Tidjane realized. It was to discredit me professionally and personally, to remove me as a competitor for government contracts. Dawn was breaking when Tidjane's phone rang. Jean-Baptiste Kofi himself. "You've made a serious mistake, Thiam." Kofi's voice was smooth, confident. "Return what you've taken from my property and perhaps we can resolve this quietly." "You mean the employee you kidnapped and coerced?" Tidjane replied evenly. "I think the authorities would be interested in that story." Kofi laughed. "The authorities will be more interested in the evidence of your corruption. Your reputation, so carefully rebuilt after your difficulties in Switzerland, won't survive another scandal." Tidjane felt a chill at the reference to past controversies during his Credit Suisse tenure. Kofi had done his research. "Check your secure server, Kofi," Tidjane countered. "The one you think only your team can access. You'll find some interesting documents." There was silence, then the sound of urgent typing. Tidjane had gambled correctly. Kofi was at his computer. "What have you done?" Kofi's voice lost its composure. "While your people were forcing Conan to help you frame us, my cybersecurity team was tracking everything. We have the complete trail showing how you orchestrated this scheme. The predatory loans, the threats, the fraudulent transfers, all documented and verified by independent witnesses." "You're bluffing. No court in Ivory Coast would—" "This isn't going to court," Tidjane interrupted. "Not yet. First, these findings go to your international investors and partners. How will European and American investment firms react to proof that their Ivorian partner engages in fraud, extortion, and kidnapping? How quickly will they distance themselves?" The line went silent again. "Here's what happens next," Tidjane continued. "Your companies will forgive all outstanding loans to Conan's family and every other victim of your predatory lending. You'll withdraw all interest in the infrastructure project, and you'll stay very far away from my employees and operations. And if I refuse, then I stop protecting your reputation and start destroying it, systematically and completely." After, Kofi reluctantly agreed to the terms, ended the call with barely concealed fury. Philippe looked at Tidjane with newfound respect. "You could have destroyed him completely. Why didn't you?" Tidjane gazed out at the city awakening below. "Because this isn't just about Kofi. It's about Ivory Coast. About building something sustainable rather than tearing down others. Real progress requires changing systems, not just removing individuals." Later, that afternoon, Tidjane accompanied Conan to Bouaké, where they arranged for his mother to receive treatment at Abidjan's best hospital. As they sat in the humble family home, sharing a meal Conan's mother had insisted on preparing despite Tidjane's protests, he observed the genuine love and resilience that bound this family together. "You risked everything to save them," Tidjane noted quietly to Conan, "just as my own father would have done." "I made terrible mistakes," Conan admitted. "You made a human choice in an impossible situation. The mistake was mine for not creating an environment where you could ask for help." In the months that followed, Tidjane established a foundation providing interest-free emergency loans to employees facing medical crises. He restructured company benefits to include extended family medical coverage, and he invited Conan to lead these initiatives alongside his regular duties. The infrastructure project proceeded successfully, bringing jobs and development to regions that desperately needed them. But for Tidjane, the true measure of success was not in the balance sheets or the buildings rising across Ivory Coast. It was in the transformation of his company's culture, from a place where a brilliant young man felt he had to face impossible choices alone to a community where vulnerability was met with support rather than exploitation. The wealth Tidjane had spent his career pursuing took on new meaning as he watched Conan's professional resurrection. True wealth, he realized, lay not in what you accumulated, but in the human potential you helped unleash. A lesson that had taken him from the boardrooms of Zurich to the humble homes of Boaké to finally understand.